Welcome to the Insights and Innovators podcast from Market Research Institute International, where top research professionals share practical insights and innovation strategies to help researchers deliver more business impact and earn their strategic seat at the table. Today's episode is sponsored by Fieldwork. Fieldwork is the qualitative research partner that recruits respondents according to client specs and hosts in-person, remote, or hybrid research sessions to uncover insights for brand and business impact. Whether in our state-of-the-art facilities or online, clients can focus on the research. We'll do the rest. Now here's your host for today's episode.
I'm John Lass, President of Sports and Leisure Research Group and past President of MRII. On today's episode, I'm pleased to welcome Michael Ramlet, CEO of Morning Consult, an insights company that he co-founded in 2014. Positioned as a decision intelligence partner that prides itself on breadth, depth, and speed of insights, Morning Consult has factored prominently in reshaping the public opinion research space. Today, we're going to tap into Michael's perspectives and vision on how today and tomorrow's insights providers will continue to transform our industry into a more consultative and strategic role. Welcome, Michael. Great to have you on Insights and Innovators.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to dive right in and full disclosure, I first became aware of Morning Consult when my firm developed its Back to Normal barometer, now the Consumer Optimism Barometer, at the onset of COVID. And we had set out to inform our clients and verticals with thought leadership that was initially a stopgap to help figure out what it would take to bring consumers back to leisure industries, and has really morphed into a pulsing of how both exogenous and internal factors are now so critical for corporate decision making. And it's funny because as we got into it, your firm's work emerged and struck me as really the only other thoughtful and timely measurement in this space. And I was frequently finding media reporting on common themes that we were both finding in our respective research. And it's been eye-opening for me because historically I'd always been a little bit skeptical about syndicated products. And I think what we've both done is really leverage a current and holistic look at public opinion into very actionable strategies for specific clients. And I guess I want to start with something more macro. I'm curious about what trends you're seeing now that no one else is really talking about.
I think the number one trend that we're seeing is this need for daily data. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion around tariffs and the geopolitical pieces, the economic dynamics, but ultimately it centers around daily data. And I think for us, when we started out, we were focused on how do you scale daily data collection around 43 countries. And it's 30,000 interviews a day. And then obviously adds up to 80 million over time. But I think what stands out is this need for daily data first materialized at the beginning of COVID, where folks want to know what was going on, but it was more macro in terms of what's going on in society or what's going on in sectors. And I think what distinguishes the trend today is it's much more micro. What's going on with my brand in that market and what are the underlying dynamics, either economically or politically for my customer base. And so I think we're seeing this play out. For instance, like one trend that stands out is sort of the rally around the flag effect for local brands. Like Maple Leaf Foods is transformed their market position in Canada pre-post the announcement of tariffs. And so I think these are the types of dynamics that we see changing pretty quickly. And you're seeing CEOs and CFOs pull guidance for publicly traded companies, and they need to be able to go into that earnings call with data that explains the last quarter and gives context for the next quarter. And so I think all of a sudden you're getting a much broader stakeholder universe that's deeply interested and needs insights. So it's that need for daily data. It's the broader application of insights across the C-suite. And I think, frankly, the third piece of it is everyone wants to be able to access it through AI. And so I think, one of the things we're doing is we're opening up early access to Morning Consult.ai, in large part because we're seeing chief strategy officers, chief financial officers that want to be able to go in, ask a business question in plain English, and they want to be able to access the numerical data that underpins it. And so I think those three trends are colliding, and the AI piece isn't slowing down. It took 20 years for PCs to reach 50% penetration in the United States. It took 12 years for the internet. Took 6 years for the social mobile revolution. It's taken less than 3 for AI to reach 50% penetration in the US. So this acceleration in democratizing access, those three things I think we see as the big colliding trends. Obviously, tariffs sort of stand out as the area in which all of them come into one view.
And we're seeing that as well from an insight standpoint. But you raise a really interesting point that I've certainly admired in seeing what you do. And I alluded to it earlier in my comment about syndicated data, and that's the ability to step from just the data dissemination world into something actionable and consultative, and really adding value to what a CEO or a strategic decision maker is going to need to know about. When you look at it more broadly from the insights profession as a whole, that's something that I've found the industry to get wrong somewhat over the years. What else are you seeing that the industry is getting wrong today, and what lessons can you impart to lead to a more beneficial transformation over the next 5 years?
I think one of the things that stands out is that it used to be a choice between syndicated and custom data applications. I think what stands out to me is that our leading Global 2000 clients, they're taking the syndicated foundation and they're building their custom programs on top of it. So about 5 years ago, we made the decision to build our own private exchange, and that allows us to crosswalk every respondent from the syndicated data sets into the custom applications for clients. And so it's both, I think, transformed the ability to do tracking programs that are both nimble with that daily data, but they're flexible in that they can actually meet the unique customer needs. And I think that's a change for the industry. It used to be I've got my custom tracking program or I've got my syndicated data solution. Now you don't have to choose between the two. You can really leverage the best of both worlds and it's more scalable. It's also just more efficient.
You obviously talked about AI, the most popular and perhaps overused two letters in the marketing space today. As we think about it from a research standpoint, is it something that you see more as a co-pilot or a competitor for traditional market researchers? Certainly, it's interesting how you've leveraged it in your company, but more broadly speaking, where does it land?
So I would go back to the very foundation of what the AI is leveraging. In this case, it really comes down to proprietary data. If you're looking at publicly available data, user-generated data, the large LLMs, whether it's OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, they've already consumed the world's text. And so I think so far we're seeing a lot of things in the industry that are related to large language models or it's consuming reports. That's table stakes. It's already been consumed by all the large AI companies. What's going to matter for the industry from our point of view is proprietary data. And in our case, we obviously feel really fortunate having done those always on 30,000 interviews is they're highly structured data sets. And I think that's something that's sometimes lost in the AI discussion is it really comes down to the quality of the data set, but also the structure of it to leverage AI. And so I think when we set out to build morningconsult.ai, our focus was how do you leverage a retrieval augmented generation architecture? So this is the idea that you can use the best of LLM. So I can type in a natural language query, but it's going to turn it into a JSON code that can go across our databases. And I think this is what should be really exciting for the insights industry is it speeds up time to value. All of a sudden, I can go in, I can start to query the data set and actually access the numerical data and ask questions of it, but it also democratizes access. So I think from our standpoint, it should empower the researcher to be more influential, not just within marketing, not just within communications, but across the strategy and finance and overall business leadership functions. And I think that's the part of this about AI that's really going to speed up. I think the issue with that, though, is it's more technical than I think most folks understand is that infrastructure, that data machine learning ops side of the equation. It's going to require a back-end architecture that a lot of, I think, the legacy firms are struggling with right now.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how that obviously diffuses, given some of the different orientations with which companies or agency side companies are bringing things through. I want to kind of pivot a little bit to, another interesting topic in the space that you work in, and certainly that I've noticed. I mean, going back to my days as an undergraduate political science major, I was first exposed to research in my senior thesis on applied voting behavior, and I really saw the raw power of insights and was drawn to it as an arbiter of truth in a world where one's personal narrative can often get in the way of that truth. I've often joked that it was research as a lamppost, right, for support rather than illumination. That's a metaphor I've used for quite a while. And I'm assuming that both of us kind of fight that urge. So I'm curious to what your perspective might be on the rightful role of insights companies in helping to shape public opinion and how you navigate that for what for many can be seen as a bit of an ethical challenge.
This is the core of our mission statement. It's the entire reason for being as an organization. We're focused on informing better decisions across business, financial, and government leaders through real-time intelligence on what people think and to better understand how they'll act. And I think that dynamic really plays out as folks are going to make decisions regardless of the information that they have. And I think oftentimes they're making decisions off of assumptions or in some cases outdated data. I mean, look at what's the state of the economy today. Traditionally, like the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, it's only 600, 700 interviews, and it's only 2 days in a month, and it's the 3 week reporting time. The economy and those types of dynamics have changed so much that I think you have to look at with empathy the challenges that CEOs face, the challenges that government leaders or financial leaders face. And I think what we recognize, at least from our opportunity set, was if we could speed up the time to collection and speed up the processing power, then all of a sudden you can get daily data into the hands of those decision makers. It's not up to us to tell you the decision you need to make. That still requires a strategic understanding of all the issues at play, and you still have to make a decision. But I think we look at it and say our number one job is to make sure you have timely, up-to-date information on what people think. Now that'll evolve over time, and sort of recognizing that you can, run marketing campaigns, you can see different programs or shifts in society, but recognizing you have to have a way to measure this so that you can manage it. And I think that's the part of this that we come back again on first principles is we need to be able to collect that real-time information on what people think, and that's going to drive better decision making across those sectors.
So you're leaving a lot of that decision making into the hands of the clients, or is there more of an opportunity to reach out and assume that consultative role? I've often joked that on this podcast and others that, hey, the really, the good research companies today are ones that, the only difference between them and a large management consultancy is the cost of the project. Are you emboldening your team to go in that direction as well, or is it more kind of leaving it out there for the client to work with?
I think it runs the continuum. So if you think about those 30,000 interviews you do on a daily basis, that's focused on having the real-time information, whether it's on brands, economic indicators, geopolitical risk metrics. That obviously provides that sort of real-time context. You can do original analysis on that, whether you are on the client side in a leadership role, whether you're in an advisory capacity working with the clients. So we work with all the major strategy consulting firms. They can obviously build on top of those data sets. But I think to your point, it's a continuum. If you want us to be more hands-on, we can design entire programs that go into original inquiry that provide a consultative approach. But ultimately, in any consulting capacity, it's still ultimately up to the decision maker at that organization to make the decision. And I think one of the things that's lost in the AI discussion is you can continue to provide even better, more persuasive explanations, but ultimately that executive needs to make a decision. And I think the perspective we have is that, unfortunately, in the last 2 decades, I don't think the industry, in terms of the pace at which it has to operate, was able to keep up with how much society was changing. And so that sort of emphasis on real-time information, you saw some suboptimal outcomes. You had folks that were using social listening metrics as a barometer for what people think. Breaking news alert, social media is not a representative sample of the population. The people who tweet are even less representative. The imputed demographics. And I think you saw all kinds of trouble if you're chasing the Twitter mob in terms of decision making. News media monitoring, really challenging. Like, are you reading the first paragraph or the ninth paragraph of the story? And do you remember what came out of that? I think these are the pieces that we feel like original research has never been more important. The challenge was how do you advance the technology so that you could get that real-time data on what people think and make it available to the decision maker in a time frame which they can make the decision.
So, so you hit on something obviously that's been a big sticking point with a lot of us in the profession, just about the representativeness. And it kind of leads to where I wanted to, go next in terms of obviously there was that old adage that, you could have things fast, you could have things cheap, you could have things rigorously, but you could only choose two. I would argue, and I think a lot of my colleagues would argue that now that's not the case anymore. You need to deliver all three to really provide value in the way the society is moving today. And you found ways to balance that speed and scale with rigor and accuracy. But at the same time, we constantly hear, and I think rightfully so, that sample quality and data quality has been under increased scrutiny in the profession. So let me get a sense again, what is it from the industry's perspective that we as research professionals need to focus on to assure that we don't lose quality as we continue to push for speed and scale? Not so much the secret sauce that you guys are tapping
Yeah.
into, But from a broader perspective, what do we need to do to maintain client trust and the veracity of what we're delivering?
It's a great question. I think to your point, it's a false choice. You should expect quality first and foremost. You should also expect speed, and you should be able to leverage the underlying efficiency gains that technology brings to the table. I think this is an area where you can really spot the difference between technology-focused organizations and sort of where the industry's been legacy-wise. One of the things I think that was our emphasis was we wanted to know and understand every part of the supply chain. And I think that's not always the case. And I think that's, obviously some of the recent news indicates how important it is to not only know and understand it, but frankly, to own your own quality continuum. And so I think from our standpoint, 5 years ago, we made the decision to move off of the public exchanges. This year, we'll do about 20 million survey interviews. So at a minimum, we're going to do 30,000 survey interviews a day. And so for us, we wanted to own from soup to nuts the entire supply chain aspect of it. And so one of the nice things, obviously, at that size, I think we're the world's largest end buyer of sample. And I think that has a different level of expectations. When we're giving daily data to the Federal Reserve or to global 2000 companies, we need to be able to stand behind that data every day. And so it's a different level of intensity around quality. And so we looked and said, okay, for a panel company to be able to engage with us in a partnership, they have to follow our security protocols. So from the very beginning of that process, and candidly, we don't trust anyone. We attach unique identifier. We have our own digital fingerprinting technology. We have all of the pre-survey quality benchmarking and checks that we have built out and have empirically tested. We have the in-survey pieces, and then we have the post-processing pieces. One of the valuable things about going every single day is that, especially in 43 countries, you can see aberrations in the data set that might otherwise not be apparent in episodic research. If you're doing a quarterly or monthly tracker, you would never spot the fraud in China or the fraud that you're going to find in India unless you're going every single day. And so I think from our perspective, it really was about how do you advance that? Well, if you own the entire tech stack there, you're going to find tremendous inefficiencies. One of the dirty secrets of the industry is how much buying and reselling of panelists happens. Unless you can actually own that entire supply chain, you're paying 2 or 3x premiums with no improvement in quality. One of the most astonishing things is how inefficient this market is. There is no correlation between quality and cost. That's a problem fundamentally in a marketplace. And I think one of the things we've realized is you can have both higher quality and lower costs by simply having a much more unified tech architecture and then holding people accountable to make sure that they're delivering on the actual real life respondent where they are that says, that you can test those pieces. I think from our standpoint, what's been so compelling is that you can use this real-time data against behavioral data sets. So for instance, there's a platform called Maiden Century. It was started by one of the world's largest hedge funds. And what's neat about it is it backtests all of these alternative data sets against SEC reportable financials. So think revenue, think night stayed, or other sort of operational metrics. And what's really compelling about that is you can see the value of survey research, right? You think about making a purchase before it flows through the credit card transaction systems, and you might see alternative transaction data. And what's powerful about that is it really hones in on, is there an underlying issue? Like, why is there an aberration in XYZ data set? And so I think from our standpoint, what stands out about the sample marketplace or this sort of quality and speed and cost dynamic is that if you raise the level of expectations, but you stay focused on the technology, you can achieve all three. Now, it's not easy. From our standpoint, the reason why we raised the Series A and the Series B was we wanted to be able to go and collect that data from the very beginning. We wanted to be able to own the tech architecture of it. But that's what I think the level of expectation on the buy side needs to be. The challenge is I don't think clients have taken enough time to really understand that supply chain and to be able to differentiate between quality.
It's vertical integration in ways that the industry has historically never thought about it holistically. I mean, I can go back. I mean, I did, gosh, I don't want to tell you how long ago it was, but we used to do these workshops at industry conferences called the anatomy of a project, and we would bring in people from different silos. And the lack of cross-pollination and understanding of those processes, the lack of control of those processes was really, really astonishingly weak.
Yeah, the degree to which there's an education on this, folks like to fall back on things like panel blend. Another breaking news alert. There's no such thing as unique panel. Does not exist.
Right.
We fingerprint everyone. I can literally show you how much buying and reselling happens every day. And so I think from our standpoint, sort of like these dogmas that folks have fallen back on as a crutch, they got to stay at the top of their game. They have to continuously be learning, whether it's at industry conference or elsewhere. This is a fast-moving environment. And I think the degree to which, the industry sort of legacy players just fell behind.
Yeah, and you've been at this for a while. You've certainly, taken some steps that I know a lot of traditional researchers haven't taken. Uh, what would be the one thing, I mean, if you fell back on, what would you wish you had done differently if you had
It's interesting. I think our investments in the technology and the data side were prescient and incredibly valuable. The things I think a lot about are actually focused on culture and the intensity around what it takes to scale an organization. The number one thing we tripled during the pandemic and we operated in a hybrid environment. And I think one of the things looking back on it and very much now core to our DNA is sort of the intensity and the grit necessary to push an organization forward. I think one of the things that stands out to me about where the industry is, you mentioned before, like what's the difference between, strategy consulting firms and a lot of the industry operators? It's not just the cost of projects. Like it's not a 9 to 5 job in the management consulting world. And so I think one of the things we realized was, to transform what we see as a $90 billion opportunity, we have to be true to the culture that we think it takes to operate in that environment. And so I think our big focus, and this has been really an area of emphasis, I think, especially with recruiting and earlier stage careers, is to understand like you have to operate at a higher level of intensity and you have to have the grit to be able to navigate really difficult circumstances. When we're working for the Fed on a daily basis and sharing data, like the onus is on us. They make really important decisions on a monthly basis around interest rates and the employment and inflationary dynamics of those. And so I think from our standpoint, in hindsight, I think sort of going through the stages of growth from bootstrapping the organization for the first 5 years to rapidly scaling the organization, it's really finding those cultural pillars. And I think that's one of the big learning moments is I think looking back on it, I wish we had been even more aggressive than we've become in terms of enforcing kind of the focus on intensity and grit.
And so that leads into where I kind of want to wrap up with a couple of quick things. We could talk for an hour, but I want to keep it within the parameters of these podcasts. And that is in thinking about skill sets. Um, let's talk about, there are a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are at some of the earlier stages of their careers. And I'm curious from your vantage point as you've redefined the essential skills that are necessary. What do you recommend for somebody earlier in their career that they need to really be focused on? What's the skill set that research professionals of the future need to have?
I think the number one piece that I look at today is being difficult to replicate is an ability to focus on business strategy and problem solving, and then marrying that with the development of executive facing skill sets. Most of the back office functions, whether it's building slides, whether it's programming questionnaires, that's going to get automated, and frankly, already has been automated. And so I think the emphasis here, early stage in your career, is really the ability to ask questions, the ability to be consultative and build credibility and rapport with an executive that doesn't have the same amount of time to dig deep into a data set or do the analysis. Those are experiences that are not going to go away. And so I think from my standpoint, when we really look at our recruiting earlier stage and at different points of career, sort of this commitment to being a lifelong learner, but recognizing that, it's less about, XYZ coding language and more about what's the business strategy problem you're solving and can I effectively communicate that to an executive stakeholder? And it runs the gamut. You might be still more data science oriented and you're dealing with internal executive stakeholders and the investments that have to be made in data infrastructure to be able to launch something like Morning Consult.ai, or it might be very externally facing in terms of helping lead a client to a better decision. In either one of those cases, in terms of kind of future proofing your career, you got to be committed to learning outside of the four walls of the academic institution you're in. And you got to be able to recognize that those are two areas that AI is going to have a very difficult time replicating.
Well said. Last thing I would love to pick your brain on, kind of related to that, from a broader perspective for the industry as a whole, thinking and looking at that crystal ball as to what the industry may look like 10 years from now. What's the pragmatic advice that you'd have for those that are going to continue to be successful and leaders in this profession?
I'm an incredible optimist for the insights industry. I actually think there's too much hand wringing that happens in the industry. Like, there are areas where we can get better every day as an industry. I think the thing that stands out is that everyone working in the industry should be focused on innovation and empowerment. AI represents an incredible opportunity to empower insights functions within existing agencies, within existing organizations, whether they're corporate or on the professional services side, because what it really represents is the ability to advance knowledge across more functional roles. It's not just working in marketing. It's the ability to go work with the chief financial officer, the head of financial planning and evaluation, understanding economic forecasting. Most economic research is done through surveys. And so the ability to leverage your understanding of insights and to navigate executive stakeholders, it's going up. I think the industry has done a disservice to itself over the last 2 or 3 decades and allowing it to be siloed. Data and analytics groups within the strategy function or within finance, those are similar skill sets. And so I'm of the belief that the underlying skill set for the insights industry is incredibly powerful. But I think we need to think expansively. And I think AI opens up this opportunity. If you went to morningconsult.ai right now, you can go in and in English, essentially access 80 million interviews, the underlying numerical pieces. You can start to do heat maps state by state, or you could do global comparisons. What's cool about that is that it opens up leverage for an insights professional or for the insights function to add more value across the organization. But I think it really is that underlying element of it's the optimism, it's the continuous learning commitment. Obviously, the programs that are underway here at MRI are incredible. Those types of things, that's what's going to differentiate if the insights industry grows beyond a $90 billion industry and if it has more influence and bigger seat at the table in most corporations. But think about it in the financial services world. Every major hedge fund is trying to understand what's going on in the marketplace with each of these companies. Every major government right now is trying to better understand, societal expectations around a whole host of issues. So I think it's a really bright future, but it's going to be imperative for the industry and for those of us in it to really lead and lean into innovation. And I think, we feel really excited about, obviously, we were with morningconsult.ai in terms of the chat functionality, but the future with agents and the underlying things that you can automate that give you higher agency as an individual and as a professional function, those are going to be really powerful here in the next 3 to 5 years.
Well said. It's a more 21st century adaptation of a recognition I had early in my career that, hey, if you think about it, insights is really at the center of all decision making in an organization. So make sure you put yourself in there as well.
Asking
Michael,
questions will always be valuable.
yeah,
I think that's
asking the right questions to the right people, no doubt. Michael, it's been great having you on Insights and Innovators. Like I said, we could go another 40 minutes, but want to be respectful of your time as well as the time of those listening and watching us on wherever they're listening to our podcast. But thanks for being a part of us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining the Insights and Innovators podcast from Market Research Institute International. Click subscribe to never miss an episode and visit us at mrii.org for more market research insights.